So you've probably noticed your programs are getting quite intricate now, and your code is reflecting this. You're having a lot of code in one place, and it may be hard to read. So I'm going to quickly show you functions and the purpose that they serve. So on a miniature scale, let's say I have a form and I've got all of these things on there, and clicking this hide button changes the visibility of all of these buttons. It makes them go away. This is something we've done in a lot of programs, and instead of creating a new form, we just hide a bunch of stuff and give the illusion that there is a new form being created. So all those buttons were labeled 1 through 6. I had 6 buttons, and nothing new here at all. I've just showed you how to hide all 6 buttons with the press of that button. Now that's fine and dandy, but what if this hide button did much more than just that? What if this button was part of a game and it was making an account and it was saving data and it was doing all of these things, not just hiding a bunch of buttons? So let's say that hiding a bunch of stuff is just one thing that this button is going to do. I know it's only coded to do one thing right now, but I'm just too lazy to make anything else. So when you have things performing a specific task, it's not a bad idea to make a function for that specific task. And how would you do that? Well, these events that we've been working with all year are basically like functions, except they're attached to an event. An event is something you can do to your form, either through your keyboard or your mouse or some type of input. But in simpler terms, a function is just a task. So I'm going to start it the exact same way I would see one of these events on my code. I could go private, void, and this is the name of your function. So Visual Studio has been giving us these names because we are attaching them to events. I'm going to give my function my own name. I'm going to say hide click. And there's all of this crap in these events that we've been working with. I don't need that stuff because I'm creating my own function, and I don't need to worry about keyboard inputs or mouse inputs. It's my own function. It's a very simple function. So notice the name of my function I've given it. I can name it whatever I want, but there are some conventions we should follow. Much like a variable, you cannot have any spaces in your function name. And unlike a variable, we actually start with a lowercase, or an uppercase letter, I should say. So that first letter is going to be uppercased, and any subsequent words are going to be mashed into one single word with a capital letter, signifying kind of helping the user see those words more clearly, even though it's mashed together. So I created this function with the sole purpose of, why'd I call it hide click? Hide stuff is a name I want to use. I was reading click up here, and it must have trickled in my brain. So my function hides stuff. And what does this function do? Well, it hides a bunch of stuff. And what are we hiding? Well, I'm hiding those 6 buttons on my form. So I'm using the exact same code, except this code is packaged nicely inside of its own function. This function exists, and it's kind of out of sight, out of mind. It's one particular task, and all of the code is bundled. It's like a folder. It's nice. It's put away. It does one specific thing. Okay, I'm getting crazy here. So what happens when I click that button? Well, I've got no code in this click event, so nothing's going to happen. That code now sits in its own function. So in other words, I have to call this function if I want that code to execute. So how do I call this function? How do I activate it? How do I get this code to basically spark and execute? Well, my function has a name. It's called hide stuff. So if I go back in my click events, you'll notice that the IntelliSense has picked up that you have a function called hide stuff. And so all I have to do is use the name of the function and put those empty set of parentheses. In other words, I'm basically copying line for line, letter for letter, character for character, the name of my function. And you'll notice once I do that, this is the cool thing about Visual Studio. When you first create this function, you can see that the name of this function is kind of turned off. It's kind of dim. It's not really bright. That means it's not being called, which means this code will not happen. But as soon as I write code, in other words, as soon as I call the function, you can see it lights up as if to tell you, okay, somewhere in your code, this function is being activated, it's being called, so this code will run. So this click event on this button calls the hide stuff function, and the hide stuff function hides a bunch of stuff. So now if I run my program, I can click it, I click the button, it calls the function, and the function hides its stuff. So we kind of got this chain reaction of code being executed. Another good reason to do that, not just in name of keeping organized and readability, is what if I had a second button? And both of these buttons, I wanted them to be able to perform the same tasks. So I'll call this button hide 2. I know hide 1 already hides a bunch of stuff. But what if I wanted hide 2 to do the exact same thing? Well, if I click on it, here is my second button. And I'm just going to bring it up here just so I have my two buttons side by side. I have a function that hides stuff. So can't I just call the exact same function and it'll perform the exact same code? Oops. So having this function allows me to use this function from all different types of sources, not just from one control, which means I do not have to write this code out a million times. If I've got a bunch of buttons hiding the exact same stuff, I'm just going to use the same function. I don't have to write that code out a million times over. So now you can see it doesn't matter which button I click, they will both call the same function. And they will both hide the same stuff. So, a little overdue, but as your code and as your programs become more complex, functions are a great way to keep things organized and to reuse code that you've already written and make it easier for collaboration and easier on yourself to understand and to follow the flow of your code as you work through your programs.